I gave my mom 6 months' notice to move out and she still wasn't ready. Did I do the right thing? Move out day. The bags are packed, the storage unit is booked, and the hotel reservation is sitting on his phone. And his mother is still standing there with nowhere to go, looking at him like he just pulled the rug out from under her entire life. There is something almost unbearable about that image, a mother standing in the doorway of a place that is no longer hers, watching the last thread of her safety net get tied off. Except he did not pull any rug. He gave her 6 months. 6 whole months to figure this out. And somehow, here they all are anyway. This is the moment every adult child with a dependent parent dreads. The moment where love and loyalty and guilt all crash into the one simple fact that you have your own life to live now. And the question of whether that makes you selfish or just human is a lot harder to answer than it should be. Our guy is 23 years old. 23. He got married this month, which is already a massive life event on its own, and he is doing it while managing a 2-bedroom apartment that has somehow been housing himself, his mother, his 32-year-old sister, and his sister's 2 preteen kids. That is 5 people in a 2-bedroom space. Stop and sit with that for a second. Think about what that actually looks like day to day. 1 bathroom shared between 5 people on a school morning. Dishes piled up from 5 different schedules. No quiet corner to decompress after work. No privacy to have a phone call without someone hearing it. That is not a living situation, that is a survival arrangement, and it has been going on for over 3 years. Now here is what I want you to notice right away, because it matters a lot. He did not wake up one morning and tell everyone to get out. He did not snap after a bad day and give them a week's notice. He sat down with his family between 3 and 6 months before his wife was supposed to move in and told them clearly, calmly, and with enough runway, that they needed to find other arrangements. He gave them a plan and he gave them time. Think about what that conversation must have felt like for him, sitting across from his mother and his sister, knowing what he was about to say was going to land hard, knowing that the second the words left his mouth everything would shift. That is not an easy conversation for anyone, let alone a 23-year-old talking to his own parent. That is not a spontaneous eviction. That is a responsible adult making a responsible decision and communicating it as fairly as he possibly could. His sister, to her credit, made it work. She purchased an RV and she had somewhere to go on move-out day. That is not glamorous, that is not ideal, and pulling together the money and logistics for something like that while living in someone else's apartment with 2 kids is no small thing. But she figured it out. She took the information she was given, used the time she was given, and made a plan. She treated the situation like an adult who understood that his kindness had an endpoint and prepared accordingly. The mother, however, did not. And that is where this whole situation gets really emotionally complicated, because the reasons she has nothing in place are not exactly mysterious. She does not work. She receives food stamps and cash assistance. She is in the process of applying for Social Security benefits. So she is not in a position where she simply chose to procrastinate out of laziness or stubbornness. She is in a genuinely vulnerable financial situation, and finding housing when you have no income and no credit and no private support is incredibly difficult. Landlords run credit checks. Shelters have waitlists. Subsidized housing programs can take months or years to come through. The system that is supposed to catch people in her situation is slow and underfunded and full of gaps. That is real. That context matters and it is worth saying out loud. But here is the other thing that is also real and also worth saying out loud. He knew all of this. He knew her financial situation before he gave her notice because he has been the one helping her navigate it. He has been her primary support system for over 3 years. He has 3 other siblings, and he is the only one actively involved. That means the weight of this woman's well-being has been sitting almost entirely on one 23-year-old man's shoulders for years, while everyone else in the family apparently found a way to not be involved. Think about what that does to a person over time. The constant background hum of someone else's needs woven into every financial decision you make, every space you occupy, every plan you try to build. So when people hear this story and immediately feel sympathy for the mother, I understand that. I genuinely do. A 56-year-old woman with no income, no housing, and nowhere to go is a heartbreaking image. But the sympathy cannot all flow in one direction, because this young man has been carrying his family at an age when most people are just figuring out how to do laundry consistently. He has been housing 4 people on what is presumably a pretty modest income, in a 2-bedroom apartment, for over 3 years. He deserves some of that sympathy too. He is not cutting her off. He is not throwing her bags onto the street and changing the locks. He is paying for her hotel out of his own pocket while she waits for housing resources to come through. He helped her contact assistance programs. He helped her move her belongings. He did the research, made the calls, showed up for the logistics of it even as he was drawing the line. The only thing he is not doing is delaying his own marriage and his own life indefinitely to keep absorbing a responsibility that was never solely his to carry in the first place. And that wife. Let's talk about her for a second, because she is somehow almost invisible in this conversation even though she is the reason any of this is happening. This woman just married him. She is 22 years old and she has been waiting to move in and start her life with her husband. She has probably imagined what their home together would feel like. She has probably thought about mornings that are quiet and evenings that are theirs and a space that belongs to the two of them. And if he had said nothing and done nothing and just let the situation continue, she would have been moving into a 2-bedroom apartment that already had 4 other people in it. That is not a marriage. That is a hostage situation with shared groceries. Can you imagine being the new wife in that scenario? You get married, you are excited, you are ready to build something with your person, and then you find out that starting your marriage means sharing a bathroom with a 32-year-old sister-in-law and 2 preteens while your mother-in-law sleeps in the next room. No. That is not a reasonable thing to ask of someone. That is not even close to reasonable. Now I do want to acknowledge the emotional reality of what he is going through, because guilt is not the same as wrongdoing. He feels guilty. He says so himself. And that guilt makes complete sense because she is his mother and she is in a hard spot and he loves her. Standing in that apartment on move-out day, watching her face, knowing she has nowhere lined up, that does something to a person regardless of how correct the decision is. Guilt is the natural human response to watching someone you love struggle, even when you are not the cause of that struggle and even when you have done everything right. Feeling guilty does not mean you did something wrong. It just means you have a conscience. What he is navigating here is one of the hardest transitions in adult life. The shift from being a child who is defined by his family relationships to being an adult who is building his own family unit. That shift requires drawing a line. Not a cruel line, not an abandoning line, but a line that says this is where my household ends and where my new beginning starts. Drawing that line after 3 years of being the one who never drew it, after 3 years of saying yes while everyone else said nothing, takes an enormous amount of quiet courage that does not get nearly enough credit. That shift is not betrayal. It is adulthood. The thing that really gets me about this whole situation is the 3 other siblings. Where are they? This mother has 4 children. 4. And the one who has been carrying her for 3 years is the youngest of the bunch, a 23-year-old who just got married. Why is no one asking why the 32-year-old sister was living in his apartment instead of helping the mother herself? Why is no one asking what the other 3 siblings are contributing? The fact that he is the only one actively involved is not a badge of honor. It is a red flag about how this family operates and who gets voluntold into the caretaker role. He has been the default caretaker not because he is the most capable or the most resourced, but probably because he is the one who said yes first and then became the path of least resistance for everyone else. His other siblings got to live their lives because he was handling it. Every time he opened his door, they got to keep theirs closed. And now that he is finally saying enough, now that he is finally putting up a boundary for his own marriage, somehow he is the one asking Reddit if he did something wrong. Let me be direct about the verdict here. He is not the asshole. Not even a little bit. He gave advance notice, he provided support, he found resources, he is covering a hotel, and he is doing all of this while trying to start a marriage at 23 years old. That is not the behavior of someone who abandoned their parent. That is the behavior of someone who has been stretched past a reasonable limit for years and is finally, carefully, respectfully reclaiming his own life. The real issue here is the broader family dynamic that allowed this situation to become his problem alone in the first place. He should not feel guilty for expecting his other siblings to step up. He should not feel guilty for wanting his wife to be able to move into their home without sharing it with 4 other people. He should not feel guilty for drawing the line that everyone else in his family drew years ago and just never told him about. What he did took courage. It takes real emotional courage to hold a boundary with your own mother, especially when she is vulnerable and struggling and looking at you like you are the one thing standing between her and the worst outcome. He did not do it coldly. He did not do it suddenly. He did it with care, with planning, and with real financial and logistical support along the way. That is love. That is still love. It just looks like the kind of love that also respects itself, and that is exactly the kind of love a marriage needs to survive. I bought my whole team coffee and my girlfriend made it a whole entire thing. Seriously? 8:52 p.m. He spent his own money, on his own break, to do something kind for his entire team. And somehow he ended up owing someone an apology for it. Read that back. Let that land. The part that is going to keep me up at night is not even the jealousy itself. It is the escalation. It is the fact that a joking response to a non-issue somehow became a demand for an apology and reassurance. Over coffee. For coworkers. So here is the full picture. He is 26 years old, he is a manager at a retail store, and he decided to use his own personal break time to go out and buy coffee for all of his associates because he genuinely appreciates their work and wanted to do something kind for the people on his team. That is it. That is the entire action. He bought coffee. For his team. The way decent, thoughtful managers sometimes do when they want to acknowledge the people working hard around them. He called his girlfriend while he was out doing it, probably because they have the kind of relationship where they check in throughout the day and it simply came up naturally in conversation. And she told him she feels a type of way about it because some of his associates are women. She was not hiding how she felt. She let him know immediately, which in some ways you could argue took courage. But the feeling she shared, and what she then did with that feeling, are 2 very different things that deserve to be examined separately. Now I want to be fair here, because feelings are feelings and jealousy is a real human emotion that not everyone has full control over in the moment. Some people feel a pang of insecurity rise up in their chest and they just need a beat, a breath, a second to process it before they can think clearly again. That is understandable. That is human. The question is never really whether she felt something. The question is what she did with that feeling once it surfaced. And what she did was take a perfectly ordinary, professionally motivated act of workplace kindness and transform it into a grievance serious enough to require a formal apology from the man who bought his coworkers hot drinks. He described her as getting upset, and then getting even more upset when he responded with a bit of humor, and then eventually demanding an apology and reassurance before the conversation could close. That progression is the part worth sitting with, because each step in it reveals something. Because there is a version of this conversation that goes completely differently. There is a version where she says something like, "Hey, I know it is probably silly, but I felt a little weird about it when I heard it, can you just help me understand?" And he says, "I hear you, I genuinely get it, but it truly meant nothing beyond wanting to do something nice for the whole team," and she takes a breath and says, "Okay, yeah, I believe you." And they move on in about 45 seconds. That is the healthy version. That is 2 emotionally grounded people hitting a small speed bump and getting over it together without anyone bleeding. What happened instead is that a light joke in response to an already thin complaint became the fuel for a much bigger conflict, and now this guy is sitting somewhere genuinely confused, genuinely unsettled, trying to figure out if he is actually a bad person for not wanting to apologize for an act of basic professional warmth. And honestly, I do not blame him one bit for that confusion. Because from any reasonable outside perspective, nothing about what he did carried even a trace of romantic intent, suggestion, or inappropriateness. He bought the whole team coffee. Not one specific woman he has a complicated history with. Not someone he used to date. Not even someone he mentioned by name. He bought drinks for everyone. Collectively. As a group. As their manager doing something managers do. Here is what really concerns me about this situation, and I want to say this carefully. The framing of her objection was never actually about the action itself. It was about the gender of some of the people who happened to receive the gesture. She was not upset that he spent money without consulting her first, or that the purchase put a strain on their shared budget, or that he was distracted at work, or anything grounded in something practical. She was upset because women were among the recipients of a professional act of appreciation. And that framing is worth sitting with seriously, because if the underlying logic is that he cannot extend workplace kindness when women are present, that is not a workable boundary for someone who manages a mixed-gender team every single day. He cannot opt out of half his workforce to keep the peace at home. That is not jealousy as a passing emotion. That is jealousy as a policy. And those are two very different things. He mentioned that he finds jealousy toxic to a certain extent and that he is a trusting person who does not spiral over small, ordinary interactions. Some people reading that will hear dismissiveness. They will think he is minimizing her feelings or refusing to take her seriously. But I think what he is actually doing, maybe without even fully realizing it, is naming a core value. He is saying that the relationship he wants to be in is one built on a foundation of trust, and that normal human contact with other people, including other women in a professional context, does not constitute a threat to that trust. That is not a dismissal. That is a belief system worth protecting. That is a man who knows what kind of relationship he wants and is starting to notice that this moment does not match it. The demand for an apology is the detail I keep returning to, turning over, looking at from every angle. Not a request. A demand. For buying coffee. There is a particular kind of emotional logic that develops in some relationships over time, where one person expressing discomfort automatically entitles them to an apology from whoever was involved in generating that discomfort, regardless of whether that person actually did anything wrong. It becomes a kind of reflex. Discomfort equals wrongdoing equals apology owed. And that logic, if it is never examined or challenged, tends to quietly expand its territory. Today it is coffee for the whole team. In 3 months it is staying late on a project. In 6 months it is a 2-minute conversation with a female customer that ran a little long. The geography of what counts as a violation grows, and the person living inside that relationship starts making smaller and smaller decisions trying to avoid setting it off. Here is where I land. He is not the asshole. Not for buying the coffee, and not for being genuinely frustrated when he was asked to apologize for it. He does not owe her an apology for doing his job thoughtfully and treating his team with a moment of basic human appreciation. What he does owe her is an honest, calm, undefensive conversation about what this kind of pattern looks like when it is allowed to keep going. Because a relationship where a partner holds quiet veto power over professional kindness based on the gender composition of a workplace team is not a relationship that stays healthy over time. She needs to do some real internal work on why a group coffee run landed with this much emotional weight. That is not a harsh judgment, it is just the honest read. Jealousy that activates at this level, over something this transparently platonic and routine, almost always has roots in personal insecurity that run considerably deeper than the specific incident that triggered it. A coffee run did not create those roots. It just brushed against them. And those roots deserve genuine attention and care, Ideally through real self-reflection or even professional support if that feels right, not through an endless loop of reassurance extracted from him every time a situation like this comes up. He handled the moment imperfectly by deflecting with a joke, and I do understand why that made things worse. When someone opens up about a feeling, even an irrational one, laughing it off reads as dismissal and tends to pour gas on whatever is already smoldering. But responding imperfectly in a moment of surprise is not the same thing as owing an apology for the act that started the conversation. He probably should have been warmer and more present when she first brought it up. He absolutely does not need to apologize for the coffee. Those are two separate conversations. And knowing the difference between them is exactly how this situation actually finds its way to resolution. If you made it this far, drop a comment below and tell me which story hit harder for you. And if you liked this video, a like and a subscribe would genuinely mean a lot.